Let's return to the Hegelian analysis of the French Revolution's dialectic. Starting from the concrete experience of the disastrous consequences to which the rush to erase leads, individuals understand the necessity of giving concrete and specific content to universalism, putting an end to universalism's mad pursuit of immediate realization and purity. Renouncing absolute egalitarianism, individuals again accept negation and difference, that is the organization of the spiritual masses in which the multitude of individual consciences express themselves. These, moreover, return to a particular and limited work, but precisely for this, they return to their meaningful reality. In other words, it's understood now the unproven and disastrous myth of a universal will, or to use language from someone other than Hegel, of direct democracy, of collective leadership that, without mediation and bureaucratic limitations, expresses itself directly and immediately in the factories, in workplaces, in political organizations. As one can see, aside from Jacobinism, the target of Hegel's criticisms are anarchistic radicalism and millenarianism. This is confirmed by his reflections on the other great revolution, namely the Puritan Revolution that breaks out in the middle of the 17th century. Putting an end to an unsuccessful and pseudo-revolutionary period of religious exaltation, and offering a positive political conclusion to years of work, Cromwell demonstrates that he knew very well what it means to govern. Taking firm control of the reins of government, he dissolved the parliament that had been consumed by prayer and he commanded the throne with great splendor, as protector. 374 To know how to govern means to be able to offer concrete content to the ideals of universalism that inspired the revolution, for example, distancing itself from the First English Revolution, from the followers of the Fifth Monarchy, the hollow utopia of a society that didn't have or need juridical norms, for the fact that individuals are enlightened and allow themselves to be guided by grace. To the degree that he knew how to distance himself from a failed abstract utopia, Robespierre also showed that he in some ways knew the art of governing, or sought to learn it. After a great revolution, especially when its protagonists are from ideological and political strata deprived of property and the political experience connected to the enjoyment of property, to learn how to govern means to learn how to give concrete content to universality. But it's above all else a process of learning by experience. With regard to the socialist revolution, that process doesn't begin or end with Stalin. Rather, the most serious limitation of this statesman is having left incomplete, or even gravely incomplete, that learning process. Let's take the national question. In Lenin, we can read the thesis according to which the inevitable fusion of nations and of different nationalities, including with regard to language, passes through a transitory period of full and free development of nations and their different languages, cultures and identities. At least in relation to the transition period, here it's evident the awareness that the universal must know how to embrace the particular. A significant learning process had already begun. We are already past the abstract universalism that is expressed, for example, in Luxembourg, for whom the particular nationalities are in themselves a negation of internationalism. Yet Lenin, in speaking of the national question, appears to grasp the unity between the universal and the particular only in relation to the transition period. Stalin is sometimes more radical, some, Trotsky for example, speak of creating a single language for all humanity under socialism and doing away with all other languages. I don't really believe in this theory of a single language for all of humanity. In any case, experience doesn't speak in its favor, but against this theory. 375 Judging by this passage, not even communism should be characterized by a single language for all of humanity. It's as if Stalin was afraid of his own courage. Moreover, he prefers to delay the fusion of nations and national languages to the moment in which socialism has triumphed on the world stage. 376 Maybe only in the last years of his life, when at that point he had indisputable authority within the international communist movement, does Stalin prove to be more daring. He doesn't limit himself to stressing that history shows a great stability and an enormous resistance by languages to forced assimilation. 377 Now his theoretical elaboration goes yet further. Language is radically different from a superstructure. It isn't created by any single class, but by a society as a whole, by all the classes of society, thanks to the efforts by hundreds of generations. Therefore, it's absurd to speak of a language as class nature. 378 But then why should national languages disappear? And why should the nations as such disappear, if it's true that the language community represents one of the most important signs of a distinct nation? 379 However, despite all this, orthodoxy ends up coming out on top. Communism continues to be thought of as the triumph of the common international language, and ultimately as a single nationality. 380 At least with regard to that mythical final stage, the universal can again be thought of in its purity, free of the contamination of the particularities of languages and national identities. It's not solely an abstract problem of theory. The attachment to orthodoxy certainly didn't contribute to the understanding of the permanent contradictions between nations that aimed for socialism and considered themselves committed to the construction of communism. It's these contradictions that played a primary role in the process of crisis and dissolution of the socialist camp. In other fields of social life we again see Stalin take part in a difficult struggle against an abstract utopia, but stopping halfway, to avoid compromising traditional orthodoxy. In 1952, therefore on the eve of his death, he feels obligated to criticize those that want to liquidate the market economy as such. In a polemic on this, Stalin wisely observes, quote, "They say that market production in any condition must necessarily lead to capitalism. That's not true. Not always, not in any condition. One cannot identify capitalist production with market production. They are two different things." Unquote. There could very well be market production without capitalists. However, again in this case, orthodoxy proves to be an insurmountable barrier. The disappearance of the market economy is delayed until the moment in which all the means of production are completely collectivized, with the surpassing, therefore, of cooperative property itself. 381 At last, the problem that's perhaps decisive. We saw Stalin theorize a third function in addition to repression and class struggle at the national and international level. A prominent jurist was right to point out that the report to the 18th Party Congress of the CPSU had put before us a radical change in the doctrine developed by Marx and Engels. 382 It was a change that Stalin had reached from his experience in government, from a concrete process of learning that had already left its traces in Lenin's final thoughts and political decisions, but that had now taken another step forward. Trotsky had argued very differently. He had hoped to synthesize the positions of Marx, Engels and Lenin in the following form: the generation that had conquered power, the old guard, began the liquidation of the state. The following generation will complete this task. 383 If this miracle did not come to pass, who could be blamed if not the traitorous Stalinist bureaucracy? It may seem misleading to use these philosophical categories to explain the history of Soviet Russia, but it's Lenin himself who legitimizes this approach. He cites and supports the excellent formula in Hegelian logic, according to which the universal must be able to embrace the richness of the particular. 384 In expressing himself in that way he's thinking, above all else, of the revolutionary situation, that is always determined by and reaches its point of rupture at the weakest link, in a particular country. Nevertheless, this excellent formula was not considered for the phase following the seizure of power by either Lenin or the Bolshevik leadership group. When they are confronted with the problem of building a new society, these efforts to bring the richness of the particular into the universal run into the accusation of betrayal. It's well understood that that accusation is aimed at Stalin in particular. Having governed the country born out of the October Revolution for more time than any other leader, it's precisely from this experience in government that he realized the emptiness of the millenarian expectations for the disappearance of the state, nations, markets, and money, and he also directly experienced the paralyzing effect of a universalist vision that tends to classify as a contamination the attention given to the particular needs and interests of a state, a new nation, a family or a determined individual. If it's true that ideology plays a significant role in the prolongation of the second time of troubles, it's necessary, then, to point out that Stalin's antagonists are particularly guilty of this. Stalin, thanks also to his concrete experience in government, seriously committed himself to the learning process through which, according to Hegel's teachings, the leadership group of a grand revolution is forced to pass through.